and it worked out in my favor because I ended up finishing the book with 11 books read, which I just said finishing the book. Which worked in my favor because I ended up the even. Hi everybody, my name is Kelsey and we're about to get very, very nerdy with my October wrap up. October was a very interesting month because I read a lot, but there was like a chunk of the month that I didn't really read a whole lot. And I read mainly one genre, which is romance. I just read like every single thing that I read in the month of October had romance. If not the main genre, like a major part of the plot. So I was in a zone. I was in a mood, which ended up working out in my favor because I ended the month with 11 books read. So let's just dive in because we've got a lot to get through. So as far as the stats go, like I mentioned, I read 11 things in the month, and that was over 3,092 pages and 71 hours listened on audio, which is over 4 audiobooks, 3 ebooks, and 4 mixed. For age category, I read 1 YA, and then the rest, the 10, were adult books. And the genres is going to look basically identical to the age category. We had 1 fantasy book, 1, and then the rest were romance as the main genre. Although, like I said earlier, romance played a part in every single book. And then the ratings are pretty good. We had 4 5 stars and 7 4 stars. So the first 3 books I'm just going to do together because it's volumes 12, 13, and 14 of Cherry Magic by Yu Toyota. So I'm up to date. I've read everything that's currently out. There's another one, like the next volume comes out in January, I want to say. So I'm just going to have to wait it out. But the 12th one ended in a way that I was like, I must pick up the next one. And then the 13th one wasn't my favorite, but then I realized I only had 1 left. And so I was like, well, I might as well just do it. So I finished what's out. 12 I rated 5, and then 13 and 14 I rated both of those 4 stars. So this series follows our 2 main characters, Adachi and Hirasawa. Adachi turns 30 at the beginning of this series and discovers he has a magical ability to read people's minds when he is physically touching them. He bumps into one of his coworkers, Hirasawa, and discovers that Hirasawa has a huge crush on him, and he doesn't know what to do with this information. So the series is basically what the relationships that stem from this ability. The 12th volume. I really liked this one. It introduced some conflict for the couples that we're following, which I found really interesting. One couple was hit a little bit harder than the other, so that's why I felt like I needed to continue right away because like it ended a little bit on a cliffhanger. But it was nice to see just like everyday average couples getting through things vibe. So the 13th volume was probably my least favorite so far in the series. I'm not sure if the rating reflects that, but as of reading it, I feel like that is the case. It basically was a thought experiment of a volume. Adachi and Hirasawa basically switch, so Hirasawa has the magical ability, whereas Adachi doesn't. And so you see kind of like a what-if scenario of the first volume, or like elements of the first volume, if the situation had been switched. And it was just kind of like a why. Like I was sitting there and I couldn't figure out why this was a thing. It felt like a filler volume. It didn't feel like it needed to be here. And I don't even think we saw the other couple that I really enjoy. So like there was no purpose to this volume. So I think that was my biggest problem with it. And then the final volume, while I didn't love it as much as some of the others, it was definitely better. We were back in the original timeline, if you will. And it did there was a couple of things plot-wise that like are not my personal favorite plot things, which is why I didn't like it as much. But like there's nothing wrong with this volume. It's just like the next step in their careers, the next step in the story. But it introduced some characters to cause problems, and I just didn't like that. It was fine. Like, it wasn't good, it wasn't bad, it was just kind of fine. So I'm eagerly awaiting the 15th volume, which will come out, like I said, in, I believe, January sometime. But I decided just to go ahead and binge this entire rest of it, because there wasn't much left, and I've been enjoying it so much that I thought, why not? My library had all of them. I just went for it, and it was a fun way to kind of kickstart some of my reading. The next book that I picked up was The Deathy Grimm by Catherine Purdy, which is the sequel to The Forest Grimm. It's just a duology, so this was the end, and I ended up giving this one 4 stars. The first book follows Clara and Axel, who are best friends, and they live in this village on the outskirts of the Forest Grimm. And there is this book of fortune or something, I can't remember exactly what it's called. When you turn 16, you can wish for something, and the book will tell you what to do to obtain the wish. And so someone uses the book for ill, and basically uses it to kill somebody. And then the book and the forest are now cursed, as well as this village are cursed. So, like, you can't go into the forest. And then there are some people who do go into the forest who are thought of as the lost. And once you go into the forest, you basically think that you are a different person, and you become a fairy tale. In this book, it's the continuation of that story. Some things are solved in the first book. The big overarching thing is obviously not, so we get answers in this one. So it's just the continuation. And it really does start almost immediately after the first book ends. I think the plot of this one was better. The first one, like, it was fine. Obviously, you needed it to set the stage and everything that was going on, but it was really chaotic and a little bit all over the place, whereas this one had a more streamlined plot that I could understand where we were going and why we were doing some of the things that we were doing. So I liked that a lot more in this one than the first one. I liked the way that Catherine Purdy wove these fairy tales into the story. In the first book, it was more of a, here are all the characters you're going to randomly meet in the forest. Now, like, here's the fairy tale that they are assigned to. You as the reader are going to know what's going on. Whereas in this one, there were elements of the story where our main character was, in the first book, very heavily compared to, like, Little Red Riding Hood, whereas in this book she was compared to Snow White. There was a princess that, like, for someone who became a princess, that at first I didn't pick up on who she was supposed to be. There's a character that's kind of a big part of this plot that becomes a huge part of the very end that was also a fairy tale that I didn't pick up on right away, and I don't know how I missed it, but it was like the way that she wove the stories in this, it wasn't as easy for the reader to understand what was going on. In the first book, it was like, this person thinks they're Cinderella, and you're like, ah, okay, so here's the story. It's going to be a Grimm version of the story, but here's the story that, like, we're going to be seeing. There was Hansel and Gretel, there was Aurora, that kind of thing. And this book, I don't want to mention what they are, because, like I said, it was woven in a way that, like, you as the reader didn't, I mean, there was clues to pick up on, but you didn't know for sure that people were supposed to be a specific fairy tale. And it definitely gave the answer to the overarching story that was introduced in the first book. And I really, really liked those parts. One thing that I didn't like about this is that it felt like some unnecessary conflict between our love interests that were introduced in the first book. It caused problems. I understand why it was there. It was for the plot. It made them, not see things too clearly. So, like, some of the answers they may have picked up on to solve the problem, they didn't right away. So, like, there were some parts of it, like, I understood why, but I really don't like when a couple gets together in the first book and the second book is all about testing that, and it actually causes them to have a lot of problems. And while, yes, like, happily ever after isn't the end, there's always more after it. Causing problems for the sake of causing problems is, like, one of my least favorite things when it comes to romances. I just felt like it was unnecessary. I know the author put it in there because it's the second book and you have to make things interesting, but, like, there was enough going on in the plot that, like, you didn't have to add that, and it just added more problems than there needed to be. So that element I didn't love, but like I said, the plot and the fairy tales and the way that this author weaves those into the story I found very interesting. And so I'm really glad that I read this. I'm really glad that I read this almost immediately afterwards, because there's a lot from the first book that has already left my brain. and it's only been about a month since I read this, and there's a lot about this book that has already left my brain, and it's been even less. So, like, this isn't my favorite series of all time, but I am really glad that I read it. It did give me that forest fairy tale vibe that I am always kind of in the mood for in the fall. Like, I always want like a fantasy book that takes place in the woods. That gives me the fall vibes. So this definitely did, and I'm glad that I read it because now I've gotten a couple more things off of my TBR, and I honestly, if I hadn't read that right away, I do not know when I would have gotten to it. Okay, the next two books I'm going to do together. I mean, technically I read a book in between them, but I'm going to do them together because they're part of the same series. If you watched my most recent vlog, I did a bunch of witchy romances. So this kicked that off, and that is the first two books in the Graves Glen series, which is the Hex and the Kiss Curse by Aaron Sterling. There are 3 books in the series. The third one takes place during Yuletide, so I've put that one off so that I can read that during the Christmas season. I'm hoping to get to that one in December. The Hex got 5 stars. The Kiss Curse got 4. I absolutely adored these books. I had them out from the library, and then I picked up physical copies because I loved the first one so much. I had a feeling I was going to feel the same way about the second one. The second one was also very, very good, and I am now obsessed, and I understand why people really like the series. And this really kickstarted my romance reading for the rest of the month, and it was fantastic. Okay, so let's talk about the Hex first. The Hex follows our 2 main characters, Vivian and Reese. And 9 years before this book started, I want to say they were like 19 or something. Something happened, and she ended up having a broken heart. And so she and her cousin Gwen, they're all witches, as is Reese. And Gwen and her basically decide to very drunkenly curse Reese. As a joke, they don't actually think it's legitimately going to happen, but they just kind of say some things, and it makes them feel better. 9 years go by. They still live in this town, Graves Glen, in Georgia, and his family basically started the town. Reese is basically told by his dad that, like, you know, we started this town, there are ley lines within this town, they need to be recharged, you have to do it. And he's like, but I don't want to go back there. But okay, fine. And so he goes back there, and the minute he gets into the town limits, his magic starts going funky, and things start happening, and like he just has a bunch of bad luck that he just writes off as bad luck until he tries to recharge the ley lines, and in doing so, it causes a lot of problems. So it comes out that this curse that Vivian and Gwen put on him legitimately happened, and now the town is cursed. And so it's the two of them trying to figure out how to fix the town because things are going crazy. It's a second chance romance between them. It's all fun witchiness. This takes place in the month of end of September, beginning of October. Actually, I think it just takes place in October. I think I lied about that. Either way, it was like the perfect time to read it. It's a fun, goofy, like romance story. There is a mystery element to it. What I loved and I found really, really interesting about this book is it had elements that reminded me of a bunch of other movies. Like, there are things in here that reminded me of Halloween Town. There are things in here that reminded me of, what were the, like, there was a bunch of them. Practical Magic. There may be some elements of Hocus Pocus, but not nearly as much. There are things that reminded me of Hotel Transylvania, which is, like, so random. But there were just, like, all of those classic movies that you watch or, like, rewatch in the Halloween time of the year is what this reminded me of. And it was just so fun to have these little, like, elements from all of these different things. So if you are someone who loves to romanticize the fall and loves to have that very cozy, spooky without being scary, witchy, practical magic vibe to it, like, this is the series for you. So I really, really enjoyed that one, and the writing and the banter and everything about that was fantastic. One thing that I found kind of bizarre about this is that I really didn't like the audiobook. I thought the narrator, it honestly drove me nuts. It is, I believe, dual point of view, and I might have made that up. No, it's not. I think it's just third person. But Reese is from Wales. His entire family is from Wales. He's supposed to have an accent, and the audiobook narrator did not give him an accent, except for, like, one line. I think there's one line where she did give him an accent, and I was like, but why this one line specifically? And it's mentioned many times that he has an accent. Also, the narrator, I think I've heard from before, and her voice just kind of, like, not her voice, but like the way her inflection is on certain lines I don't love. So I found it really, really fascinating because I couldn't stand the audiobook, but I loved this story. And I primarily listened to this on audio. Like, I didn't really read along with this. I didn't buy this book until after I had finished it. I still gave this 5 stars. I still got sucked into the story, even though I couldn't stand the narrator, which I feel like is a very good like sign that this was just a fun, good story that was going to work for me no matter what. I loved the writing. I loved the banter. Everything about it was fantastic. So the fact that there was an audiobook that I despised and still loved the story, I just think was very interesting. So I wanted to mention that because usually I'm not someone who lets the audiobook narrator affect my experience, but for some reason lately there's been a few narrators and I'm like, I don't know about that. This is one of them, but I still loved it. So there's that. The second one, The Kiss Curse, had a different narrator and there was an accent, so everything was fine. Like, everything worked out in the end. This one follows Gwyn, the cousin I mentioned in the first book, and Wells, who is the oldest brother. Reese is actually the youngest of 3. For some reason I thought he was the middle brother, but he's not. He's the youngest of 3. And Wells is the oldest, and the one that is most like their dad. And Reese and his middle brother, Bowen, I think his name is, they don't get along with their dad, but Wells does because he's basically a carbon copy. And so he is manning this bar in Wales that is like set on a space that is like very important to their family magic. And so the father is really upset because based on the events at the end of the last book, the Penhallow, which is their last name doesn't really carry much weight in the town anymore. He's really hurt by the fact that like there's not going to be this history of them in this town anymore. And so Wells goes and he's like fed up with this bar that isn't making any money. Like, no one comes in really anymore except for family members. And so he's like, I'll start a store, I'll do something there, and it'll get our name out there. And he says like, yes, thank you, perfect. And so he and Gwyn end up, like, she already has a store there and he sets up across the hall or across the street, and they have a competition of sorts where they're both doing the same thing, basically. And then some stuff starts to happen in the town, and Gwyn's magic starts going a little haywire. And so it's their romance. I loved it. I loved seeing Wells as a character mature in this, because by the end he understands where his brothers come from with their father, and he's not just doing the things because his dad told him to do them. It was like he kind of understands everything now, and he understands why his brother loves Vivian so much, and why this family, Vivian and Gwyn and their aunt, are so important. I guess actually it's Gwyn's mom, but that family is really important and actually an amazing family. And so you just kind of see him mature as a person, and I really enjoyed seeing that. He's still gruff. It's still like a grumpy sunshine kind of vibe, but you really get to see underneath all the layers, and I just really enjoyed it. I loved this series. It was amazing. This is like, if you are someone who loves like the Hallmark Christmas movie, this is the Hallmark fall vibe. Like, it's that kind of thing where like there's way more substance to it, but you're in for fun. You're in for having a good time, not a long time, because like these are not long books. And so like if you want a lot of complex characters, you're not going to get that. But at the same time, it's not just like a super like fluffy story with no substance underneath. Like, they are real people and they feel like real people. So it was fun and I loved them. All right, the next one is actually the one that I read in between those two, which is Hex Appeal by Kate Johnson. This is not what I expected in the best way. So trigger warnings in this book for sexual assault and rape. It's all historical, but it is mentioned later on in the book to explain some of one of our main characters, like the way that they deal with some things. So this book calls our main 2 characters Essie and Josh. And Essie is a witch, and she lives in this house with a bunch of other witches. And Josh just moves in to their little small village of Goodwinter in Essex. He's from America, and he inherits this cottage house from his father, who inherited from some great aunt or something. And so he moves in and is trying to kind of like start his life over, and discovers that he has some tenants. But they're all tenants for like weird reasons, and they can't actually pay him until he discovers there's this one house who hasn't been paying rent since the 1700s. And he goes, what on earth? So he goes to try to find it, which is Beldam House, and that's where Essie lives with these other witches. And there's a, no, I was going to say curse. It's not a curse. There's a hex spell. There's a spell in this house where basically, like, you cannot find it unless you are shown it, and even then, if you leave, you get confused as to where you are and you can't find it again. But, like, if you need it, it's there. For example, one of the witches who lives here is a midwife, so if you are in need of a midwife and you desperately need her, the house will let you find her. So it's things like that. And so it's Josh and Essie's relationship, because he actually starts to remember her and the house, and he shouldn't, based on everything that they know about the house and the magic on the house. He should not be able to remember her, and he does. You go in, like, looking at this cover, you think it's just going to be a fun rom-com with a lot of smut. There's really not that much smut in it for a book that's clearly has a pun on the word sex. Like, there is not that much smut in this book. There is later on in the book, but, like, it takes a long time to get there, and it's very, very mild. I mean, it's descriptive, but as far as, like, some of the smut that I've read, this is on the mild side. And you really get to see these two characters become comfortable with each other, and it takes a lot for them to get together. It's not just like an immediate get together and then they have to figure out what's going to happen there. Plus, Josh doesn't know about magic, and so, like, that's a whole layer on top of everything. And so it's just watching them is so much fun, and, like, it does have all of those, like, great fluffy romance rom-com moments, but there's, like, a deep dark, like, they both have a lot of trauma to work through, and there's also, like, a big bad monster that, like, shows up randomly, which is not what I expected. Like, in the vein of, if you've read Human Rights and the HMRC series by Juno Dawson, like, it gave me the same vibes of, like, the ending of that. So, like, there are some things that are much darker than I anticipated going in. So this cover and this title is very misleading. But it was still so much fun. Like, there was one part where I was like, we've reached the moment. This has happened much quicker than I thought it was going to be, but, like, this is the climactic moment of what I anticipated the series or this book doing. And I realized I was only, like, 40% of the way through the book, and I was like, what else is going to happen? And then crazy things happen. So I really enjoyed this. This is the first in a series of 3 that are not related to each other. They all just have, like, a pun in the title that has to do with hexing. I might continue, I might not, I haven't decided. I liked the way it was written. This author has a very interesting writing style, like, in a good way. Like, she describes things in ways that I have never thought of describing them. So it worked well, and I had a really good time reading it. I don't think I'm being very good at explaining what I think, so if you haven't seen my witchy reading vlog, I would go check it out, because, like, I definitely was much more eloquent in my thoughts in that one. But overall, I really enjoyed the story. It's not as super fluffy as I thought it was going to be, but that was okay. It still had all the things that I wanted from a good witchy romance, and I didn't expect much going into this, and then it became a book that I could not put down. The next one and the final book that I read in that vlog was A Witch's Guide to Magical Innkeeping by Sangu Mandana, which I gave 4 stars to. So trigger warnings in this book for derogatory talk or language used against people with autism, or just immigrants. Actually, both of those things. There's people with autism, and there's also, like, immigration and immigrants in the UK, and then talks of depression. So this one is, I always compared it to the previous book that I read by this author, which was The Witch's Guide to, The Secret Society of Irregular Witches, I believe is what it was called. And it's not set, I think it's set in the same world in the sense of, like, the magic system is pretty similar, but, like, none of the characters are the same. Actually, I'm not even sure it's set in the same world. I think it's just magical. I think they're both set in, like, a UK inspired setting, but this one had, like, a whole governing body for magic. So let me back up and tell you what this is about a little bit. This book follows our main 2 characters, Sarah Swan and Luke. And Sarah, the book starts when she is, I believe it's 15, and she lives in this house with her great aunt, and this fox that actually is a cursed person in fox form. And one day, her great aunt just, like, drops dead, and she's distraught by this, and the fox is like, I know a spell to, like, not rehabilitate, but, like, bring her back to life. She does this, and in doing so, loses like 99.9% of her magic. And so she is kicked out of the guild, which is this governing body that you have to like register with. They're not the biggest fan of foreigners, as they call them. There's a lot of stuff with this guild that, like, specifically one person in the guild that is her mentor. He's there's I can't say anything nice about him. He's actually a terrible person. Anyway, and there's like a school element of it, and she was in the school, and so she gets kicked out of the guild and basically lives in this inn with her great aunt. And so it jumps to the present, which is I think 15 years, and they're running this inn. There are a few people that live there permanently. It's kind of like one of those stories where like the house collects people. There is a spell that she put on the house when she was really angry one day, not realizing that she was doing it, and it basically means that like you can only find the house or the inn if you need it. And so it only brings like good-natured people to this inn. And so that's their situation. She's living with her nephew, her great aunt, and a couple of other people who have found this house. And she uses her magic in really small ways. Like, it takes a lot of effort for her to do things, but she's still able to do some stuff. Very, very minimal things. And then you have Luke on the other hand, who works with the guild. He works for the librarian at the school, and he has a younger sister named Poppy who is autistic, and she is at the guild. But because of the way that she learns, no one can really like get her to focus the way that they think that she should focus, and so like she's really not welcome in the guild anymore. So he's trying to figure out what to do, and the librarian sends him on a wild goose chase, which eventually leads him to this inn, and he ends up staying for a little bit at the inn. And so he and Sarah, because like they went to school together, so they do know each other. So like it's the two of them as he is trying to figure out what to do, and she's trying to has found a spell that can get her magic back. And so like she's trying to figure that out, and they end up kind of helping each other, and there's a romance between them. The romance part of the story, which I expected to be a much bigger part of it going in, is relatively small. This really follows Sarah and her just coming to terms with things. Because like I had mentioned a little bit earlier, she had a mentor, which is like the person that's behind a lot of the derogatory language, if you will. And he never really thought highly of her. He mentored her, but like she was the only person who could outmatch him for magic. Like she was very, very powerful. And so he's kind of like, people are scared of him because he has all this magic, and he does a lot of things. Like he's got his hands in all the places in the school and in the guild. And so because of that, the way that he trained her when she was younger was not as orthodox as people think it was. And so because of that, he really did a number on her. And so she does not think very highly of herself and her magic. And like, she really thinks that her magic is her. So watching her kind of try to get this magic back when she feels like she has lost a huge part of herself because of that, because she feels like her validation comes from magic, when of course it doesn't. It comes from who you are. And so you've got her great aunt there, and you've got Luke, and you've got other people in her life that are trying to like let her see like this better part of her. So she goes on a very big journey, and there's even parts of it because when she does lose her magic, obviously she gets really depressed, and because of the whole like cycle of she thought that her magic was what made her good, and so, or like what her worth was in her magic, that kind of thing. And so you really get to see her work through a lot of that in this book, because Luke thinks like he sees her as like a great person. But then on the reverse side, he is dealing with a lot because of the way that their parents treated them, because of the way that many, many teachers have treated Poppy. He is always on edge about how people are going to react, respond, talk about Poppy around him. And so he always feels like he has to tell them that she is autistic right from the get-go. And when he shows up at this inn, it's like the first time that he's in a place where it does not matter. Like he doesn't have to, I don't know what the right word is, but like he's always on edge because he only knows that it's a matter of time before something happens and they're going to have to leave this place because no one can really accept Poppy for who she is. And then he comes to this inn where, of course, they accept Poppy for who she is. It doesn't matter what's going on with her. Like, so she learns differently than everybody else. So what? We all learn differently. And it's like you see him get to relax for the first time and not worry about his sister and not worry about what the world is going to think of his sister. And so you have the two of them grappling with their own stuff. And it's a fantastic story when it comes to the deeper side of these two characters. The magic is incredibly confusing. There is no strict how things should go. There are no rules to magic. I mean, there are, and they're a little more described in this book than in the previous book I read by this author, but it's a very, like, loose system. There are some things that are, like, set in stone, but it's mainly about intention and how, you know, the words or how you interpret a spell and things like that. And some things don't need spells. Some things just need your intention behind it. And so it can get really confusing sometimes. So the magic side was not my favorite because, again, very confused. I wasn't really sure what was going on. I liked seeing the chemistry between our characters. I did like seeing those elements. It was in there and it was good when I did see it. I loved the found family vibes in this, which I feel like I should have expected going in based on the previous book I read by this author because it was in that book as well. And if you like seeing people who are dealing with a lot and coming to terms with, like, really grappling with it, because, like, yes, there's romance, but they have to get over things separately before they can figure things out together. And so I don't know, I just really liked this story. So, like, while I went in expecting one thing and I didn't get that, I got something better, and that's just what this author does. And so if you go in expecting this to be a fun, super cozy story, it has those elements, but it's way more than that. It's way more about these characters learning to love each other before they can love someone else, that kind of thing. And Sarah getting over a lot of things that her mentor had taught her when she was younger. And he's genuinely, like, the worst human I think I've ever read about. So there's just a lot of depth to this story, I think is what I'm trying to say. I don't know if anything I just said made sense, but I did really like it. It wasn't exactly what I expected, and there were elements that I didn't love about it, but overall, I basically sat down and read this in one sitting. So, you know, that I feel like shows a lot. Speaking about reading things in one sitting, the next book that I picked up was Devil's Daughter by Lisa Kleypas, which is the 5th in the Ravenels series. I gave this 5 stars. I read this in a day. I don't know. I just loved this book so much. There wasn't anything specific in the plot or the characters that would make it better than any of the other books in the Ravenel series. I just couldn't put it down. So this series, I've talked a lot about it, but this series basically follows the family of the Ravenels, and each romance follows someone in this family. And in the first book, we're introduced to 2 brothers. One of them is, like, the one who basically takes on this family and this estate, and his younger brother, who starts the series as, like, a drunk and a rake and things like that. And then his brother basically puts him in charge of the summer home, and he gets sober real quick, and he learns how to become basically a farmer and does some really amazing things with the estate. I think he becomes, like, the estate manager, basically, of this country estate. And so it's been 5 books since then, and this follows him and the oldest. Okay, so I'm trying to figure out how to tell you this without being too complicated. In the Wildflower series by Lisa Kleypas, the 3rd book follows Evie and Sebastian or something. And so this series follows some of their kids become love interests. Like, in the 3rd book, their oldest son becomes a love interest. And so this one follows their oldest daughter as well. So there is some crossover from a series that I've loved previously. Anyway, so Phoebe previously got married to a man that she kind of knew her whole childhood. He was very ill and sickly, and they had 2 kids two sons specifically, and he's passed away, and it's been a couple of years since he's passed away. And so she put one of their family friends in as like running the estate because, you know, she was so in her grief and she just couldn't do that. And so she didn't stay there. And now she's come to terms with it's been a couple of years. She really needs to start managing this estate for her son, her oldest son, because it's going to be his inheritance. And she needs to get kind of, not get over it, but kind of get over it. And so she and West, who is the brother, get off on the wrong foot because West bullied her son when they were in school. She doesn't like him, but then learns real fast that he actually is not the pompous ass that she thought he was, and she could learn a lot from him. So it's their romance, and it has lots of twists and turns, and I just really liked seeing Phoebe come out of her shell and West get over himself. So in this book, there's not a lot of trigger warnings. I did write a couple of them down. I said at domestic abuse, it's all historical. West's father was kind of a terrible person. We learned about it in previous books. It's mentioned offhandedly once, but I definitely wanted to mention it. And then obviously mentions of bullying because West bullied her late husband when they were much, much younger. So I every time I read a book in the series, I go into it going, there's no way this can be as good as the previous one, because the previous one was my favorite in the series. And then each time I've proven wrong. So I think I need to own this series because every book has been I think my least favorite is the first one. And it's still got 4.5 stars. It's still got a really high rating. So I am just in love with this family and these characters. And each time I read a story, it just gets better and better. And I really like seeing in this one, Phoebe kind of starts to understand the estate. And then when she cannot figure out what's going on, she calls Wes and she goes, I know that you know this. Can you just tell me what these books are saying? Because I can't make heads or tails of these. And it's because there's some very interesting math that's being done. And she is correctly suspicious about some things. And so you get to see her kind of take charge, be the woman in charge, and break out of her shell. And, she's been grieving for so long, and yes, grief stays with you, and she very much loved her first husband, and, even as flawed as he was, that grief's gonna be with you forever, but there is a time when you kind of have to, rejoin the living, if you will. And so she really gets to come back into who she is as a person in this book. So I really liked it. It was fun. I read it in one sitting. I'm obsessed with this series and the family in this one. So, it's great. I then did, in fact, pick up Mate by Ali Hazelwood, and I gave this 5 stars. This was everything I wanted and more, honestly. Trigger warnings in this book for threat of sexual assault, cult and cult-like mentality, as well as an illness that could potentially be fatal. So if any of those things are triggers, just know that those are really big parts of this plot. So this one, I don't want to say too much. It follows Bride by Ali Hazelwood, which followed a vampire and a werewolf forced into a marriage of sorts, marriage of convenience, and then what comes from that. This one follows her best friend, and so she's it's basically 2 werewolves. There's a lot with the werewolf lore that I learned from Mate. Again, I learned from Bride. Again, I'll say in this series, I think it just scratches the surface on what you get if you deep dive into the Omegaverse and the werewolf lore and things like that. This continues with that a little bit. There are some new things I learned in this book about werewolves that I didn't know from the previous book, because those things wouldn't have happened because the main female character in that book was a vampire. So it definitely was different. And I think I like Bride just the tiniest bit more, because my favorite part of that book was the world building between the vampire and the werewolf cultures. And of course, you do get some world building in here. You do get a little bit more explanation of, the werewolf and the culture that surrounds that. Specifically, our main 2 characters, Serena's backstory is a total mystery, so we learn more about that. And then Cohen's backstory. We learn his along the way as well. But because it's the second book, you don't have as much world building. So of course it's not going to like stand up to the first one if that was my favorite thing. But it still got 5 stars. So there's that. I don't really want to tell you anything about what this book's about because, again, it's a sequel. And while it's a spin-off with a different couple, you do need the first one to set the stage for what happens here. But it's mainly just Serena discovering her past, figuring out some things, and Cohen just along for the ride. And it's definitely grumpy sunshine. Actually, it's probably just grumpy, to be honest. But the sass between them and the snark and the banter, I mean, I don't know why I keep going into an Allie Hazelwood and this book and then being surprised by how much I love it, because like I know I love her stuff. Like her stuff is amazing. I'm never disappointed with a book that I've never once been disappointed with a book that I've read by her. So when I go in and I find myself laughing out loud and loving the banter between them and like sitting there giggling, kicking my feet about it, like I don't know why I'm surprised by these things, but I'm always surprised by these things. I'm trying to see if there's anything else I wrote on my notes that I haven't mentioned, because like I said, I don't want to say too much because again, sequel, but I loved it so much. If she continues to write things in this world, I would not be upset. It actually has helped me because it introduced me to some common werewolf type situations that I'm, as of recording this, I'm reading another different book that's about werewolves, or werewolf shifter romance, if you will. And there are some things brought up in that book that I would be very confused by if I hadn't have read this series already. So I don't really know what else to say. I loved it. 5 stars. It was a great time. I think I finished it in a couple of days. I tabbed the crap out of it. I highlighted the crap out of it. This is definitely my favorite series by Allie Hazelwood. I've read not everything, but almost everything. There's a couple of books by hers that I haven't picked up yet or haven't read yet, but this is by far my favorite, and I just keep going back and rereading sections because they're so cute, and yeah, I love them. I love them. They're fantastic. And then I ended the month with a fun little novella by Allie Hazelwood. Shocking, I know, which is Hot for Slayer. This one came out early in October. It's the beginning of like, I don't actually know how long the series is, but it's a beginning of like, I think it's called Secret Sexy or something like that. And it's a bunch of different authors who have written novellas for Amazon. I ended up giving this one 4 stars. I know nothing about vampire slayers. Like I never really got into Buffy. I just, like, it's not like I'm opposed to getting into Buffy. I just, like, never, that was not a show that I watched. And so, like, the whole Vampire Slayer culture, that's not the right word, but, like, fandom, maybe, I'd never read anything like that. So this was my first step into that. And it follows our main 2 characters. One's a vampire, Ethel, and Laszlo is a vampire slayer, and they are at each other's throats. One night in present day, it kind of does show you some history of them getting to know each other a little bit more, or like, I guess, running into each other many times. In present day, something happens, and in an incident between the 2 of them, he hits his head and gets amnesia and totally forgets who she is. And so he ends up coming home with her because she's like, I can't just take you to a hospital. You're a slayer. You're also mortal like me. And they're going to look at your biology and be very confused. But also, like, your goal in life is to kill me. So this is really strange. And so, like, he can't remember certain things, but he can remember feelings. And he can remember, like, he doesn't know his name. He doesn't know her name. He doesn't understand that they are mortal enemies. All he understands is that he is really attracted to her and that he is some sort of spy of sorts, because like he is assessing the room. He knows all the exits and things like that. He looks down at his body and he's like, I have knives in every single pocket. And so it's the 2 of them in a very short time period, basically a night, where she, maybe a couple of nights, where she is taking care of him. Someone who wants her dead, and it's their story, and it's just fun. So like, there wasn't too much to it. This was just a really fun ride. Novellas are weird because sometimes they work and sometimes they don't. There's not really any sort of middle ground for me. They either really work or they really don't. And this one is on the working side. I think it's because I really like Allie Hazelwood's writing. Her banter, their chemistry was like palpable from the get-go. So this was just a nice fun one that I read on Halloween. It was my last read of the month. It was just a fun little, like, let me squeeze something quick in for the Halloween vibe, and I just like, I really enjoyed it. So I definitely want to see what other things are in this Amazon novella series. I want to say the second book is by Christina Lauren, which is another author duo that I like, and so I'm curious what theirs would be about. But I didn't think much of this one. I just wanted to read something fun on Halloween, and this was it. This was fun. It was 4 stars. It was great. Romance. I didn't expect a ton from it, and you don't get a ton, but I got exactly what I needed. Okay, that's it. We've been here for quite a while. I hope that you enjoyed this very long wrap up. Let me know, as always, if you've read any of the books that I mentioned in today's video, or what you read in the month of October. Did you get into a bunch of spooky reads? I didn't read a lot of, I had plans to read a lot of like fantasy and mystery thrillers, and my brain said romance and only romance, so that's the vibe we went down, and I'm not upset with it. I think it turned out really well. I got a lot of like spookier, supernaturally leaning books, and I'm very happy about that. So I went off on a tangent there. Let me know what you read in the month of October. And if you want to comment something but you're not sure what to comment a moon, or is there a werewolf emoji? Or a green heart, something that represents this cover to you, because this was definitely my favorite book of the month. But that is all I have for you guys today, so I hope that you enjoyed it, and if you did, don't forget to give it a big thumbs up, and subscribe it down below if you want to be part of this awesome growing family. I've got all my social media down there, as well as other fun bookish links, so check all that out, and I'll see you guys in the next video. Bye.